Alrighty, guys, I got to thinking recently, what are some of the more underrated comic book movies of all time? And I decided to just start making a list. I thought maybe it would be a good exercise for me to think about a segment in which I talk about what are some of my favorite or most underrated comic book movies. But as I was making this list, and maybe eventually we'll make a full list and we'll do a ranking and do something like that. But as I was making this list, one movie continued to come to mind. It just kept floating to the front, and it kept bothering me, and eventually I stopped and I said, I just need to talk about this movie. I think X-Men Days of Future Past might be the single most underrated comic book movie, dare I say, of all time. X-Men Days of Future Past. If you have not seen that movie for a long time, and if you have not seen it at all, I would highly encourage you to watch it. It is perhaps my favorite X-Men movie, if not my second favorite X-Men movie behind Logan, which I also love Logan. And I feel like Logan, right? I was tempted to put Logan on that initial list of most underrated comic book movies of all time. I feel like, though, it has its own subset, it has its own niche, if you will, of that comic book movie that is more gritty and grounded. And I think X-Men Days of Future Past is interesting because it really thrives as a true comic book superhero movie. But Logan is a very gritty Western that just happens to focus on Wolverine and Professor X. But still, I think people love Logan, and it got some attention at the Oscars as well. But X-Men Days of Future Past, it is a comic book movie, it through and through, a superhero comic book movie. And yet, I think that it's amazing because it deals with some concepts that have threatened to topple other movies and entire franchises, the MCU in general, with time travel and multiverse and things like that. And it does it so well. One of the earliest videos I've made on this channel, I believe it came out, I want to say 2021, is about how X-Men Days of Future Past did one thing better, far better than Avengers Endgame. And that was time travel. Because honestly, with time travel, there are those shows and there are those movies where they have to explain the whole mechanics, and part of the intrigue is the sci-fi-ness of it all. I think Loki as a TV series is one of those series where, yeah, you kind of want to explain what's going on here with branches and pruning and things like that. But honestly, at a base level, when we're dealing with time travel, I know that they all might make fun of Back to the Future of, oh, that's not real and blah, blah. I don't care. Because as an audience member, the only reason I'm interested in time travel is insofar as it makes me care about the characters. I know X-Men Days of Future Past and its time travel logic doesn't make any sense. It's just so comic booky with Kitty Pryde and sending you back to your older... But I don't care. Because you know what that time travel did, and the whole idea, the logic of simultaneously having the past and the future coexist at the same time, it creates stakes. At the end of X-Men Days of Future Past, you have the future fighting for its very survival while the past is trying desperately to create a possible future in which all mutants can survive. That part is... That's the point of it all. The point of the meeting between old and new Professor X, maybe it doesn't make sense. Maybe there's no logic to it. Maybe there's, you have to comic book your way out of it. But the point of that scene is to get to that moment where the older Professor X can look at his younger self and say, there is still hope. Just because you stumble and lose your way does not mean you're lost forever, right? I butchered that line. I know that's not the exact line. But I think that those things, in general, time travel and multiverse and things, I think we kind of get lost in the mechanics of it all because, yes, they're important, especially if you're building an entire universe on it with the MCU and its multiverse saga. And yeah, with the DCU and its quantum unfolding tunnels and portals and things like that. Sure, it's important that we kind of know how we're getting there. But at the end of the day, I mean, time travel in X-Men Days of Future Past is so simple, yet so incredibly effective. Another thing that X-Men Days of Future Past does so well is it focuses on the characters. It is one of those stories where, yeah, it's not as deep and as heart-wrenching and as, mind-blowing of an emotional story as Logan, for example, or some recent examples where, like WandaVision, it's not that emotional, but it chooses to focus on a broken, battered, bruised Professor X, which is such an interesting place to take that character. It chooses to have Magneto be a part of the team. And maybe he's good, maybe he's not, but you never know until the end when he finally breaks through and he's like, no, this is ridiculous. I'm not gonna side with the humans anymore, which is such a Magneto thing to say. It focuses on Mystique, one of the characters that has been on the fence the entire time, the entire series, about whether or not she's good and whether or not she's part of the X-Men and whatnot, and whether or not she wants to side with Magneto. It focuses in on those characters while also supplementing it with the future characters to show what a desperate place that they are in. The action is great. The stakes are fantastic, right? Just a very simple, you got to go back in the past because one mistake, one little decision by Mystique set the entire future's course on a cataclysmic cataclysmic future event that led to the Sentinels, that led to the destruction of the entire future for mutant kind. I mean, I really do believe that when you take a step back and take a look at X-Men Days of Future Past as an entire package, take a look at the flow, right, with the Quicksilver scene in the middle to be a really nice break and a really fun scene in there, but also to take a look at the heart, take a look at the ending with the Magneto, with just lifting up an entire stadium is crazy, with Wolverine, with Beast, all the characters in the past, but also all the characters in the future as well. This is a movie that I think takes the right combination of nostalgia, which, yeah, nostalgia. It uses nostalgia. Guess what? Nostalgia is not always a bad thing. If used well, that scene between Professor X, both of them, the Patrick Stewart and James McAvoy versions, I love both of them, is amazing. And it's emotional, and it's a part of the story. It harkens to the kind of emotion and nostalgia that you have with Toby, Andrew, and Tom all in the same scene. I think X-Men Days of Future Past is one of those movies that I think people like it, but I think we forget because it was Fox that made that movie, and Fox didn't always make the best X-Men movies. With X-Men Dark Phoenix, and I didn't love X-Men Apocalypse, and New Mutants was not great. But also, it made Logan. Fox made Logan. It made the 2 Deadpool movies before Deadpool and Wolverine. And X-Men First Class I thought was good. And it made X-Men Days of Future Past. I think it gets lost and buried in all of that because it was pre-MCU, it was right around the time when the MCU was peaking. Guys, if you have not watched the X-Men series, I don't know if you can jump right into X-Men Days of Future Past. I think you have to watch some of the older films as well to kind of get a sense of it. But really, take some time to appreciate this movie. I do think maybe this will become a series where I talk about some of my most underrated comic book movies of all time. There are a couple others that I have in mind when I was making that initial list. And I really think that this is a movie that is worth revisiting, that is worth putting up there with any of the other movies. We're talking about Avengers Endgame. We're talking about Avengers Infinity War, Spider-Man No Way Home, Spider-Man Far From Home, Black Panther. I really think that this stacks up to any of the best movies in the MCU, and even DC movies like the Batman or the Suicide Squad or Wonder Woman. I think that X-Men Days of Future Past really deserves to have a place amongst all those movies. Guys, what do you think about X-Men Days of Future Past? I know this is kind of a random segment here, but wanted to make one because I just wanted to appreciate one of my favorite comic book movies of all time that I don't think we get a chance to talk about, especially now that the MCU is moving forward with its own mutant saga. What do you guys think of the movie? Let me know in the comments down below.